stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker of Elkins Consulting. If relationships are the key to happiness, communication is the doorway. And communication is most engaging when we use stories as a foundation. We share stories for many reasons, to persuade, to entertain, to connect. But what we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're perceived by the people you're interacting with. In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you, and you'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into the lessons from each of those situations. When I'm working with clients, I remind them to listen for understanding, not to respond. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen to consider your related stories, and to listen and consider which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. For today's podcast, I had the opportunity to interview Kimberly Davis, author of the incredible book, Brave Leadership. Well, I'm lucky enough to be sitting here today visiting with my friend Kimberly Davis. I asked her to join me because she is about to publish an outstanding book called Brave Leadership. And it's about how you have to step into yourself for every challenge that you come across and choose to take. And we had this interchange online about that, about stepping out. And I just had to have her here so that we could talk through some of why she feels that way and where her story comes from. That said, I'd love to introduce Kimberly by asking her a question. Our listeners will be able to read your bio and go to your website and pre-order your book on Amazon through this blog post that'll be associated with the podcast. So I'm asking you to share something about yourself that isn't on your LinkedIn profile or that people might not otherwise know about you.
Hi, Sarah. It is so much fun to be with you. I have to say, I'm so excited. Like you, I spent some time in Montana, although my years in Montana were when I was much, much younger. I grew up in Montana. I was there from age 5 until 17. And so we grew up on a ranch about half an hour out of town, and I had the lovely opportunity to feed 200 cows every night after school, even if it was freezing and 20 below zero, which I know you know a lot about what those days and nights are like. And rode horses, and I vastly preferred my horse to other human beings at that time in my life. And my best friend used to board her horse at our ranch, and so we were inseparable. We just used to spend our entire summers on horseback until, of course, we had to go move irrigation pipe at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we'd move irrigation pipe and get back on the horses. And it was a great idyllic childhood. Although at the time, I have to say, I didn't appreciate it very much. The idea of having to go feed the cows was something I didn't love, but looking back at it, I'm really grateful for it.
Isn't that funny? I think people would consider that an eccentric way to grow up because it's so uncommon.
I think, well, for Montanans, maybe not so much, but definitely for most everyone else I know, when they find out that I grew up on a ranch feeding cows and moving irrigation pipe, they think it's a thing for sure. But you know what? It made me who I am, and so I'm pretty grateful for that. Although, at the time I told my dad, I can't believe he paid us a penny a pipe to move irrigation pipe. A penny a pipe. Don't you think that they should have called child labor on it? I mean, really, we made 40 cents from a whole line of irrigation pipe.
But we make very hardy adults when we grow them here in Montana.
That's right. Resilience. We've got grit.
Oh my gosh. And more. Absolutely. Well, we have a little something in common when it comes to growing up in an eccentric way. When I was about 13, my father bought a hot air balloon and went to pilot training. And so we had a hot air balloon. We went hot air ballooning almost every weekend, definitely through the summer and sometimes in the winter when there wasn't a lot of snow on the ground. And it was in Colorado Springs. But as a family, until I was out of high school, we would travel on weekends and go to Steamboat Springs, Colorado, or Eagle and Vail, Colorado. We went out, and Alamosa in New Mexico. We went to the Albuquerque Balloon Fiesta and flew our balloon for years at the Albuquerque Balloon Fiesta. So when I tell people that, again, it's the same response. Really?
No, my response was like, you win. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Be able to hot air balloon over the Red Rocks, Garden of the Gods? That would be amazing.
Yeah, you would think so. But just like you, when I was 16, I just wanted to sleep in. And here's my dad coming up, waking us up at 4 a.m. to go out and light everything before dawn. That wasn't so exciting for me. So thank you for that introduction. That is definitely a unique upbringing. And we definitely create gritty, hardcore folks here in Montana and in the West generally. I have friends from Wyoming that are just like you with that grit and perseverance and resilience. So I asked you to come on this podcast with me because I know there's a story, there are a lot of stories, but there's one particular story behind this idea of brave leadership. And I had a conversation with a woman just a few days before our interchange online about how nervous she was about something that was coming up. Yeah. And I happen to know this woman, so I know that she has a lot of experience behind her, and she's been through a lot over the years that this shouldn't be such a big deal for her, but it was. And I said, but all evidence points to your being able to get through this and thrive. You have to know that. If you look at all of your previous experiences that you got through, and not only got through, but beautifully experienced, and now you have these stories behind it. And so we came down to the conclusion that from now on, when we start to question whether we can do something, we use this phrase in our heads, all evidence points to.
I love that.
So tell me a story that really is kind of a pivotal moment where you understood, you better recognize this whole concept of brave leadership.
Yeah, well, so when I was this kid on the ranch, I was this fearless girl. I used to let nothing stop me. I would be feeding these 2,500-pound bulls, and I would sing at the top of my lungs, twirling about the pastures. I was a little strange, but I was fearless, Sarah. And and as I got older, I played the leads in the school play, went out for speech team, and I did this internship for the news station in our little town, Kalispell, and all these things. When I think back now, I should have been scared to do, but it didn't even occur to me to be afraid. I just did them, and then I went to college. And when I went to college, I first studied music, and then I moved into the theater world. And when I went on my first auditions, something happened that I had never ever experienced before in my life. I remember standing up there on the stage, and I couldn't breathe, and my hands were shaking, and my jaws were tight, and my head started to swim, and I couldn't even remember my name. And I got a little freaked out because I thought, who is this girl? This is not the person I've known myself to be. And auditions for me were tough for a while. And then when I would miraculously get cast, in spite of all my auditioning woes, everything seemed to change. And I would step on the stage, and I would connect to the other actors on the stage with me, like we're connecting right now. And I would stop thinking about what people thought about me. And I would stop thinking about, do I look weird, and am I making a mistake, and are they judging me, and I have to prove myself, and all of those things that we do when we find ourselves in a really vulnerable position where the stakes feel high, right? And all that self-consciousness just melts away, and all the tension melts away, and it becomes easy almost. And so I knew there was something I was doing that was when I was on stage was working for me, and then when I was off stage, it would all come flooding right back. I remember sitting in notes with my director, and my jaws would be clenched and my stomach would be tight because I would stake my whole self-worth on everything that would come out of his mouth. And for years it was like this. I'd feel powerful, and I'd feel this sense of ease and grace on the stage. And then off the stage, I would feel self-conscious, and I'd feel like I needed to prove myself, and all of these things that weren't serving me. And we had some fantastic tools on the stage that would help us when we were acting, that made it possible to push through those feelings of vulnerability when we were performing. But it had never occurred to me to use them in any other context. And so then fast forward many, many years, I find myself in the training and development world, and I knew nothing about business when I first jumped into training and development. So they were my education. These participants in from these Fortune 500 companies, I would study them because I was hungry to learn as much as I possibly could. And as I observed them, what I noticed is they were dealing with a lot of the same things that we dealt with when I was on the stage, when I was auditioning. They were trying to prove themselves, and they were jockeying for attention. And when their boss would show up, they would kind of slink back, or they wouldn't own their power, and all of these different things. And the theater is a really vulnerable place. The stakes are high. It turns out that the workplace is a really vulnerable place, and the stakes are high. And so I started to connect the dots. Yeah. And I was, as I was in this new phase of my life, when I was doing the training and development, I was also reading everything I could get my hands on about authenticity and purpose and leadership and presence and influence. And I just had this hunger to learn and to grow. And I eventually connected the dots and went, wait a second, the tools that we have in the theater could make a difference to these people. And I wonder if they could make a difference, not just in the workplace, so they could show up more powerfully in the workplace as leaders, or when they're having to have high stakes conversations, but could they make a difference off stage too? Could they make a difference in our real life? And what I've come to learn is yes. I mean, there are times, I still to this day have times where I feel afraid, and I feel vulnerable, and I feel anxious and overwhelmed and stressed. And if I can use these tools, and I'll tell you about the tools in a minute if you want to know about them, if I can use these tools, I can get back on track with myself. And for me, I think that's the most powerful thing there is how to be who you are powerfully in this world, to get out of your own way so you can really connect and have an impact. That's what it helps us do.
Mm-hmm. So do you have a specific instance where this happened with you, where you applied that lesson and suddenly you got over that fear, like in your audition?
Yeah, well, so a couple of years ago, I had this fantastic opportunity to do TEDx in Dallas, Texas. And I was so excited. I got to do TEDx, and I was going to talk about what it means to be brave on the TEDx stage. And how exciting is that? And, Sarah, when you're talking about being brave and you're not feeling very brave, it is probably the most vulnerable thing there is. So I remember when I flew, I was living in New York at the time, and I flew into Dallas, and I was going to meet with the TEDx organizer the day before the talk. And I was driving it was on the SMU campus, on the Southern Methodist University campus. And so I was about an hour early, and I noticed that my hands were shaking. And I thought, well, I'm hungry. I haven't eaten all day. I better go get food, right? So it's March in Dallas. It's already in the high 90s. I get out of my rental car. I go find this fast food Mediterranean restaurant, and I eat really fast. And I noticed that my hands were still shaking, and I could feel emotion pooling behind my eyes, and my stomach was clenched. And I realized at that point that it wasn't hunger that I was experiencing. I was petrified. I was completely catastrophizing in my head. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this TEDx thing about what it means to be brave, but I don't feel brave at all. And so my business is going to spiral into the ground, and I'm going to make a complete fool out of myself, and everything I've worked for is going to crash and burn. And this is what was happening in my head. And I went back out to my rental car, and I'm sweating like crazy, and I'm starting to cry, and I thought to myself, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I went back to my hotel room after my meeting, and the meeting went fine because I was able to hide it, but I felt I knew it was going on inside. And I went back to the hotel room, and I had anticipated that I would feel some nerves. I didn't anticipate that I would feel this level of anxiety, that I was going to experience it was an anxiety attack for sure. Mm-hmm. And so in anticipation of this, I had brought a lot of pictures of these participants that I had worked with over the years through On Stage Leadership. And so I spread these pictures of these people who I have grown to love. They were in my classroom, and these people who had taken great steps to show their own courage and to overcome their own fear. And I put their pictures around my hotel room. And I gave my TEDx talk connecting to the human beings that I knew to be the people in those pictures. And
the
to
people who found value before.
Yeah. And what is the impact I wanted to have on Gary, who was sitting over there, who I knew who Gary was. I've spent so much time with Gary, and what is the impact I want to have over there on Casey, and what is the impact I want to have on these incredible people whose pictures were all around my room. So there I was, speaking, giving my speech alone, but I wasn't alone. I have to say that by that my courage came back. And when I went back the next day, when it was time for me to give the speech, I stood in the lobby and I looked around that room, and I thought, this has never been about me. It's not about my business. It's not about me at all. This is about this woman over here sitting on the bench who greeted me so warmly, and she's from Ireland, and she was excited to be at her first TED event. And this is about the guy standing next to the register over there. And when I stood on the stage, I remember thinking, okay, what's the impact I want to have? Why am I here? And that transformed everything for me.
Wow. The first thing that popped into my head was the fact that I know that some of us give off this impression that we are super confident and have it all together.
Yeah.
I know I come across that way. And people have told me that. And I know that you come across that way. That's been my experience with you. And I know a few other people, even John White, comes across online and over the phone as very confident. Yeah. And when I met him for the first time face to face about a year and a half ago, I remember being struck by the fact that he didn't appear that confident. And I felt like I knew him. And it's the same with all of us, that we give these impressions of being really confident and all together, when in reality, as you say, it's each time that we are faced with that challenge that we have to find it again.
That's right. I don't think our brave is not an all or nothing thing. It's not like we're born with it. Or some people got really lucky and they won the brave lottery. I don't think that's true. I think it unfolds every situation we face.
Or maybe we were born with it, but we lost it because of all the societal pressures and things that we experience through life that kind of tell us, oh, you're not that great.
And we just have to refine it in every situation. Maybe that's it. Yeah. Huh. But, I think it's that humanity. It's the sense that I get what it's like to feel afraid. So that connects us, that brings us together as human beings. And we think that we have to show this persona, this perfection. But the truth is that's not what really connects people to your heart. What connects people to your heart is you being willing to show who you are as a human being. And as human beings, it's messy. It's not perfect. You're going to you're going to feel vulnerable. That's the beauty of it. It's also the difficulty, the challenge.
And I think there's so much value in feeling that vulnerability, not just demonstrating it, but acknowledging it internally, that it's not only normal and okay, there's value in it. Because if you don't feel some level of vulnerability when you're doing something, it makes me wonder if you're really putting your heart into it. And I had this conversation with Zach Messler one time about if you're not nervous, you're not doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that, he gets less and less nervous as he does more and more speaking. And he's phenomenal. I mean, when you meet him, especially if you come to No Longer Virtual in February, when you meet him, you're going to see this confident guy that when he speaks, he just absorbs the audience into his energy. It's just fantastic.
Yeah.
And he said he doesn't get as nervous as he used to. He still has flutters.
Yeah.
And I said, but those flutters are valuable. Even it's not that he doesn't get nervous anymore. It's that he controls it differently and he understands it better. But that doesn't mean it's gone. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think that I know for myself. So for myself, I've been teaching now for, about 15 years. And when I teach, I don't get nervous in the same way as when I keynote, because I don't keynote as often. Mm-hmm. And the energy isn't nervousness when I teach. It's I'm able to be more focused on the participants. So instead of using the focus outside myself to overcome my nerves, which is what I do in a keynoting situation or in a networking situation or any of the situations that make me feel vulnerable and uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. I use the same techniques to connect more deeply. So I'm still doing the same things, but I don't experience myself in the beginning of it feeling nervous. It's more excited.
I was just going to ask if you think you transform that energy, and
excitement.
Instead of being nervous, you're actually more excited and eager to have that impact on the people in the room because it's going to leave them with a positive change in their lives.
I think that's absolutely true. We can totally reframe that for ourselves. So I think that's totally true. Yeah.
That's interesting because I try to suggest that to people because I've been singing professionally for years, but I still every once in a while will find myself in that kind of almost a nervous breakdown state where I'm perspiring and my hands are scrunched and I'm really stressed out, and it still happens sometimes, not as often as it used to. But you're right that I try to reframe that in my head, and I suggest that to others who are new to it. And I suggest, well, stop telling yourself you're nervous. Tell yourself you're excited. Change that internal dialogue. Yeah. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
I think that's very true.
But I like your idea of reframing it in terms of the impact you want to have on the people around you, rather than focusing on your own nervous energy, making sure that you realize it's not really about you.
Yeah. Well, it's a very powerful technique because what it does is it overrides your amygdala. So your amygdala is the part of your brain that does the fight or flight. It sends out the cortisol through your body and creates all those wonderful sensations, your stomach fluttering, your hands sweating, and your jaws clenched, and all of those things. That's the amygdala saying, hey, there's risk here. You should either run away or freeze or fight, right? But if the amygdala doesn't pick up any danger, there's no risk, it's not going to send those sensations through your body. So simply focusing outside yourself is a great way to override your amygdala, right? But what I think is so interesting, going back to our conversation, is confidence comes from having a sense of self-efficacy, of knowing you can count on yourself, right? So like you're saying, it doesn't happen as much as it used to. when you sing, you don't get those same experiences as much as you used to, because you can count on yourself. You've done it enough times. You've survived it.
All evidence points to.
All evidence points to, right? And so it's the same way for me with teaching. I've built up a sense of self-efficacy over time. That's where confidence comes from. I know I can count on myself to get through this, right? And so it doesn't show up as nerves for me. It does show up as excitement. So it's not necessarily reframing it. It's because I know I can count on myself. I'm not as nervous. But in situations that I haven't done as much, that's where the self-talk can start really, bringing you down.
You
like
don't
a big old torpedo. You don't have as much evidence to prove that you can do it. Well, and the funny thing is, I've been speaking most of my life. I started doing speech team when I was 13. So you would think that I would have all evidence points to, and yet at the same time, I think the higher the stakes get for me, it's one thing to be speaking to a group of 100. It's another thing to speak to a group of 1,500, where I feel like 1,500 people are spending this hour with me. I want to make sure it's worth their time and they get something that's powerful. But what I have to remember is that the same conversation that I have with 20 people that can reach 20 people, there's just more people, right? It's still having
There's still people.
Right. There's still people, and they still just want to have a conversation about it. And so what I've really learned to do is my greatest strategy for speaking is to just simply have conversations with people. So I don't present any longer. I just have conversations. And it's harder for me on the front end for the bigger conversations from a nerves perspective, which I really have to use my tools then.
It's definitely a turnaround for me. I've always thought about the nerves as being kind of normal and another valuable tool. I mean, being a little bit nervous can be a valuable tool because it's going to make you can't get complacent if you get a little nervous.
Well, and if you're not feeling nervous, you're not stretching outside your comfort zone, right? So what's causing the nerves is, I don't know if I can do this. This is uncomfortable for me. I've not done this much. And so if you're not experiencing those nerves, that means you're playing it pretty safe. And so I love teaching, but if all I did was teach, I'd probably not be living up to my potential.
And you probably wouldn't be as great a teacher, because if you don't believe in stepping out of your comfort zone yourself.
Exactly. How can I talk about being brave if I don't ever put myself in situations where it's hard to feel brave? And I think that's the big thing, is that we all feel afraid, but we don't have to let it stop us.
Right. And to continue to do it well into as long as you are breathing, you continue to find those opportunities to find your brave.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Sarah, I mean, I tell you what, I work with CEOs. I just last week was working with the C-suite at a big hospital in Dallas. And I mean, these guys and women have huge jobs with huge titles, and they felt as vulnerable as talking about purpose, talking about themselves, as some people do, talking to an audience of 2,000 people. It was outside their comfort zone. We all have those experiences.
And the question is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to let yourself get comfortable and skip it? Or are you going to step out of your comfort zone and try something totally different?
Right.
I know where I'm going to make that decision. I know where you go with that decision. I think they underestimate how much of their happiness comes from growth. People get so comfortable being comfortable that they forget what happiness looks like because they're comfortable.
Right. I would agree. And I think that the core is people don't trust themselves. And maybe I can connect the dots all the way back to those ranch days. I had to be resilient, and I had to figure things out. I mean, I weighed maybe, 60 pounds dripping wet as a middle school kid. I mean, I was skinny and small for my age, and yet I had to figure out how to do these really hard things that someone my size couldn't do. And so I always kind of knew I can count on myself to figure it out. But I don't think everybody has that. And knowing that you can count on yourself, that you can trust yourself, I think we're all better than we know. And we have to risk checking that out.
This is kind of a perfect complement to a podcast I did with Laylee McKinley. And that podcast was about building a foundation in order to be able to do what we're talking about. And if somebody doesn't have that as a child, that doesn't mean that they can't build it as an adult. Because just because you didn't have that childhood on a ranch where you had to be resilient and discover your grit doesn't mean that you can't do it in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s. I think it's really a matter of choice. Do you want to develop that side of you? Then you have to have the foundation, which means you have to start from scratch. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
I mean, for myself, I tend to be a boil the ocean kind of girl, where I want to change the world, right? And I think a lot of people think if they're unhappy in their job or they're unhappy in their life, they have to make these massive changes. And that thinking so big puts them into paralysis, right? But if they can take one small action, and this is where the idea of focusing on impact outside yourself, because it helps you get out of your way. If you can take one small action to have an impact outside yourself, that's going to force you into growth. It's going to force you into action and propel you in a new direction. So you don't have to have it all figured out on the front end before you move. You just need to take that first step.
So in some cases, that may be as simple as hiring somebody to do your resume.
It might be.
I mean, that's a big one. If you think you aren't worthy, or that you really want to change jobs, but it's just too overwhelming to even consider it. Hire somebody. Find somebody that you can trust to help build you up through your resume. Or maybe it's as simple as volunteering to feed people at the soup kitchen.
Right.
I mean, just one step to, like you said, think outside of yourself.
Right. Well, and volunteer opportunities are a phenomenal way to grow your leadership skills, because, nonprofits need people who can wear a million hats and who can really lead efforts to make a difference. And so if you want to grow your leadership skills and you're currently in a role where you don't have a leadership role, then that's a great way to start developing that side of yourself.
And if you don't have time for any of those things, I think one of the best ways to start to grow yourself and grow your confidence and that foundation to step up and take those baby steps is to meet people like we have on LinkedIn or other platforms. There are a lot of platforms out there, Pinterest, even Facebook, even though, it's mostly older adults now, apparently, on Facebook. But I think about LinkedIn in terms of reaching out and meeting people and connecting with them and figuring out how you can help them. Even if it's just a matter of saying, for instance, one of my connections in a few years ago put my name forward to speak at an event. And that was a huge help to me. And she didn't think that she could help anybody. And yet she got me a job that I really wanted to do, which was a keynote. It was a big keynote. And so I think people underestimate what they can contribute.
That's right.
And that's something that just keeps coming back on LinkedIn as they realize after connecting so-and-so to so-and-so because they seem to have something in common or could collaborate on an effort or their complementary skills. And that's providing value, and that's a baby step. It doesn't take
That's right.
much to do that.
That's right. Well, what's so great about LinkedIn is kind of the great democratizer, because it gives everyone a chance to participate how they choose to. So I've seen, what's fascinating to me is all the people that are writing, and these are not professional writers. These are admins in Pakistan, and I mean, people from all over in all different areas with all different expertise levels, and some with not much expertise, but they're putting their voice out there, and they're starting to have conversations. And it's amazing to see some people gain traction so quickly because people are just hungry to talk to real people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's right about LinkedIn. It really has evened the playing field for people. I don't hesitate to reach out to somebody that I know to be kind of a minor celebrity in their field. I don't hesitate because I feel like I have something to offer here. And
well, you are becoming a minor celebrity in your work, in your field. So, Sarah, I'm always blown away how well connected you are and how respected you are in the LinkedIn community. I mean, people talk about you all the time.
Well, thank you. That's something I really don't think about very often. I'm it's an everyday thing for me is what am I going to do today? I don't really think too far in advance. So
I'm kind of the same way that way.
A little impulsive sometimes.
Some people are very strategic with the way they participate. And I since I'm nurturing 3 platforms, I just don't have the time to be that strategic with it. But I so applaud people who can be.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of nurturing your network, I am so excited to be in the middle of reading your book, Brave Leadership. And I know that anyone who hears this podcast is going to be eager to reach out and not only pre-order it, but read it voraciously. So I'm really grateful that you took the time to sit here and talk to me about brave leadership, about those vulnerabilities that we expose and how that connects us to the people around us, no matter who you are, whether you're a CEO or maintenance staff of a building.
Yeah.
Sharing your voice and sharing that vulnerability just connects us. It's what it's about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has been so much fun talking to you, Sarah. I so appreciate you reaching out and having this conversation and to share this conversation with your listeners. It's been a huge joy.
Well, I'm looking forward to another one. Maybe we'll follow up in a few months.
That would be great.
After your book is released.
Okay.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
Listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going